I was 35 years old, and I never liked my 65-year-old neighbor. Grumpy, sick, always complaining, and nobody cared for him. But one simple gesture changed everything. The day I helped him clear the snow in front of his house. I had no idea that old man was hiding secrets that would change the way I saw the world. And that's what I'm going to tell you today.
I used to think my neighbor was just an old, bitter man no one could ever love. He shouted at kids, complained about noise, and treated everyone like enemies. For 35 years I lived peacefully, avoiding him like the rest of the neighborhood. But one snowy morning changed everything. That was the first time I saw the truth hidden behind his anger. What if the man you hated most was carrying the heaviest secrets of all? What if your neighbor was not just a grumpy old man, but a spy who once shaped history? Stay with me because what I'm about to share will change the way you see people forever. Most of you watch these stories, but don't subscribe to the channel. If you truly want more powerful stories like this, hit the subscribe button now. Don't just watch, be part of this journey. I was 35 years old when everything started, living in a quiet American neighborhood where nothing extraordinary ever happened. At least that's what I thought. Across the street lived a man everyone despised. Edward Carter, 65, frail, always sick, and with a permanent scowl carved into his face. He complained about barking dogs, children playing, cars parked too close to his driveway. Nobody wanted to deal with him. I didn't either. I had my own problems. I worked long hours at a local construction company, came home tired, and only wanted peace. But Edward made that nearly impossible. He once called the police because my porch light stayed on too late. Another time, he left a note on my car windshield, accusing me of parking 2 inches too close to the curb. To me, he was nothing but a miserable old man wasting away in his own bitterness. Then came that morning in January. Snow had fallen heavily through the night, covering everything in thick white silence. As I stepped outside with my shovel, I noticed Edward on his front lawn. He was bent over, weak, desperately trying to push snow aside with shaky arms. Every movement seemed to steal his breath. He coughed, paused, then tried again. Something inside me, against my own will, told me to cross the street. "Need a hand?" I asked, shovel in hand. He looked up, his face red with cold and anger. "No, go back to your house. I don't need your pity." Normally, I would have gladly left him there. But that morning, I didn't. Maybe it was the way his body trembled. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe something deeper that I couldn't name. I ignored his words and started shoveling anyway. He muttered curses under his breath, but didn't stop me. By the time I finished clearing his path, his breathing had calmed, and for the first time ever, he nodded at me. Not a thank you, not a smile, just a nod. That was how it began. The next week, Edward knocked on my door. I almost didn't believe it when I opened it and saw him there. His hands were shaking, and his eyes avoided mine. "Could you pick up some medicine for me at the pharmacy?" he asked. His voice was rough, like asking for help was harder than the illness itself. I agreed, partly out of pity, partly out of curiosity. From that moment, it became routine. Sometimes he asked me to grab groceries. Other times, to drive him to the bank or pay bills. Slowly, the grumpy neighbor turned into a fragile man who couldn't survive alone. Against all odds, we built something resembling trust. Yet, I couldn't shake the question. Why me? Edward had lived in that house for decades, surrounded by people who wanted nothing to do with him. Why choose me, the man who once hated him as much as the rest? That question haunted me as the weeks turned into months. The more time I spent with Edward, the more I noticed things that didn't make sense. His house, though dusty and filled with old furniture, had walls lined with books in foreign languages, shelves stacked with outdated radios, typewriters, strange gadgets I couldn't name. In his study, locked drawers he never allowed me to touch. And the photographs, black and white pictures of cities I had never visited, people I didn't know, some wearing military uniforms. One afternoon, as I drove him back from the hospital after a chemotherapy session, I finally asked, "Edward, what did you do before retiring? I mean, you don't exactly look like a man who just worked a desk job." For a long moment he stayed silent. Then he chuckled, but not with humor, more like regret. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Try me." His eyes met mine, sharper than I'd ever seen. "I worked for the CIA. My brother too. We weren't the kind of men people invite to dinner. We were the kind they sent to places nobody was supposed to know about." I laughed nervously, thinking it was just the rambling of an old man. But deep inside, something told me he wasn't lying. From that day, my perception of Edward began to change. He wasn't just a bitter, lonely neighbor anymore. He was a man carrying secrets heavier than his illness. And somehow, for reasons I couldn't yet understand, he was starting to share them with me. Little did I know, helping him shovel snow was the first step into a story that would forever change my life. The weeks turned into months, and what started as errands and small favors slowly grew into something I never expected. Edward, the neighbor I once avoided like a disease, had become part of my daily routine. Every knock on my door, every request for groceries or medicine, pulled me further into his world. And strangely enough, I stopped minding. There was something in his eyes now, something different from the bitter rage I once saw whenever he yelled at kids or cursed at barking dogs. Behind that harsh exterior, there was exhaustion, regret, maybe even loneliness. He no longer looked like a man furious at the world. He looked like a man carrying secrets too heavy to share. One evening, after I drove him back from the hospital, we sat in his living room while he tried to regain his strength. The house smelled of old leather, dust, and faint smoke from a fireplace that hadn't been lit in years. I stared at the strange objects scattered across the shelves. Typewriters, shortwave radios, stacks of notebooks filled with handwriting I couldn't decipher. "You were serious that day, weren't you?" I finally asked. "When you said you worked for the CIA?" Edward's lips curled into the faintest smile, though his eyes stayed sharp. "Do you think an old man like me could make up a lie that outrageous?" "Honestly," I admitted, "I thought you were just delusional." He laughed, though it sounded more like a cough. "Delusional? Maybe, but I wasn't lying." Then he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper as though the walls themselves could betray him. "Michael, there are things I've seen, things I've done, that you wouldn't believe. You think the Cold War ended quietly? No. It was fought in shadows, in alleys, in whispered conversations that could topple governments. My brother and I, we were sent where no one else would go. And we paid the price." I froze, unsure how to respond. His words carried weight. He wasn't rambling. He wasn't confused. He was confessing. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Edward's eyes, tired but still piercing, locked onto mine. "Because I don't have much time left. And because, somehow, you were stubborn enough to shovel snow for a man who didn't deserve it. You broke through walls no one else could. That makes you dangerous, or maybe it makes you the only person I can trust." From that night forward, he spoke more. Not in long stories, but in fragments, pieces of a puzzle that painted a picture darker than I could have imagined. He told me about nights in Berlin, tailing targets through fog-covered streets, about sitting in smoky cafes in Moscow, pretending to be a diplomat while passing coded notes to strangers, about a mission in South America that went wrong, costing lives he never stopped counting. "Spies aren't heroes, Michael," he said once, his voice heavy. "We're ghosts. We take orders, we do the things good men won't, and we disappear. People cheer for victories they'll never know we paid for with blood. My brother and I, we lived and died in silence." Hearing him, I felt a chill deeper than the winter wind outside. But then came the twist. One night, as he struggled to climb the stairs, he handed me a small brass key on a chain. His hands trembled as he pressed it into mine. "When I'm gone," he whispered, "use this. Don't open the wrong drawer. Don't look in the wrong folder. Just trust that when the time comes, you'll understand." I didn't know what to say. Felt like a scene from a movie. But this was no script. This was real. As his health declined, my visits turned from casual errands into hours of sitting by his side. I took him to doctors, argued with insurance companies, even stayed overnight when the pain became unbearable. At first, I thought I was doing it out of pity, maybe duty. But the truth was I cared. Somehow, this grumpy old man had become more than a neighbor. He had become family. And he noticed. One morning, as I prepared his breakfast, he said softly, "You remind me of my brother. Stubborn, loyal, willing to walk into fire for someone else. He died 30 years ago on a mission no one remembers. You're the first person since then I've trusted enough to sit at my table." The words hit me harder than I expected. I didn't know whether to feel honored or burdened. But in that moment, I realized Edward wasn't just giving me errands. He was giving me his life piece by piece. Yet even as we grew closer, I couldn't ignore the strange feeling that his house was more than just a house. I noticed cameras, barely visible, tucked in corners. Wires running behind walls. A locked basement door he never let me near. It didn't make sense. One evening, while helping him organize his study, I stumbled upon a box of VHS tapes. They were labeled with dates, years of them stretching back decades. Edward froze when he saw me holding them. His face went pale, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. "Put them back," he ordered. His voice was sharp, cold, the voice of a man who had once commanded. "What are they?" I asked. "Memories," he said after a long pause. "Records, mistakes, things you're not ready to see. Not yet." I put the tapes away, but the image burned in my mind. What kind of man kept decades of recordings locked away? What kind of neighbor was I living next to? Over the following weeks, Edward's health spiraled. The chemotherapy drained him, left him frail, barely able to walk. But even then, his mind stayed sharp. He would grip my wrist and whisper things. Warnings, regrets, half-formed instructions. "Trust no one. They'll come looking. When I'm gone, the truth will find you." Each phrase left me unsettled. What truth? Who would come looking? The reclusive neighbor I once thought was just a bitter old man had become a riddle wrapped in shadows. And the more I tried to pull away, the more I realized I couldn't. I was already part of his story. One night, during a storm, he called me to his bedside. His skin was pale, his breath shallow. He reached for my hand, his grip surprisingly strong for someone so weak. "Michael," he rasped, "do you know why I lived alone all these years? Why I pushed everyone away? Because you were angry," I guessed. "No," he said, shaking his head. "Because I watched them. All of them. Every neighbor, every street, every movement. I never stopped being what I was trained to be. Surveillance was my life. I couldn't turn it off. That's why they hated me. That's why I deserved their hate. But you saw past it. You didn't even know, and still you stayed." The confession left me speechless. "You're the only one who didn't run," he whispered. "Promise me something, Michael. When I'm gone, open the drawer, use the key, and never forget that even spies need someone to care." His eyes closed, and for a terrifying moment, I thought he was gone. But he wasn't, not yet. That night, as the storm raged outside, I sat by his bed until dawn. And though I didn't fully understand what he had given me, I knew one thing. Edward Carter was no ordinary neighbor. He was a man whose secrets could burn down the world or change it forever. And soon, those secrets would be mine to carry. Edward's body weakened faster than the doctors predicted. By March, he could barely walk across the room. His voice, once sharp and commanding, had turned into a whisper. But his mind never dulled, not even in the final days. He still looked at me with those piercing eyes, as though measuring whether I was ready for the weight he was about to leave behind. I visited him every day, sometimes staying overnight. I made his meals, managed his medication, argued with doctors who spoke in cold, clinical terms about months at best. Yet no matter how much I did, I couldn't stop the inevitable. Edward was fading, and he knew it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he called me to his bedside. The room was dim, filled with shadows stretching across the walls. His breathing was shallow, but his eyes were fierce. "It's time," he said. "For what?" I asked, though I already knew. "For you to understand who I really was." He motioned toward the study, the locked drawer, the key he had given me weeks earlier. My hands trembled as I unlocked it, the metal clinking in the silence. Inside, I found a stack of folders, each thick with documents, photographs, and maps. Alongside them sat a small black box of VHS tapes, identical to the ones I had seen before. "Take them," Edward whispered. "All of it. When I'm gone, it's yours. Don't ask why I chose you. Just know that I did." I looked at him, desperate for answers. "Why me, Edward? Out of everyone. Why give this to me?" His lips curved into the faintest smile. "Because you cared. Because you didn't walk away. You saw an old man struggling in the snow, and you stayed. Spies like me, we don't believe in accidents. But maybe you were the closest thing to one." His hand squeezed mine, weak but steady. "Promise me you'll look after it. Promise me you won't let it die with me." I nodded, though I didn't fully understand what I was agreeing to. The next morning, Edward Carter was gone. I sat in that quiet house for hours, numb. The man the neighborhood hated, the man I once despised, had died in my care. And somehow, I felt like I had lost family. Days later, the will was read. To my shock, Edward had left everything to me. The house, his savings, his possessions. The other neighbors gossiped, whispering about how I must have tricked him, how unfair it was. But none of them knew the truth. None of them had seen what I had seen. At first, I didn't want to touch the folders or tapes. Grief weighed heavy, and the thought of uncovering secrets meant for someone else felt wrong. But curiosity gnawed at me, and then, one sleepless night, I opened the first folder. Inside were detailed reports, names, addresses, dates. But these weren't foreign spies or enemy agents. They were my neighbors, families on our very street. Edward had documented them all meticulously, for years. Every argument, every new car, every stranger who visited. He had photographs taken from angles I couldn't explain. Notes written in precise, clinical language. My stomach churned as I realized the truth. Edward had never stopped being a spy. His retirement had been an illusion. He had been watching us, watching me, this entire time. I pushed the folder away, my hands shaking. But something inside me refused to stop. I opened the black box of tapes and slid one into an old VCR. The screen flickered, grainy footage filling the room. At first, it showed nothing unusual. Kids playing in yards, neighbors mowing lawns. But as the tape went on, I saw myself. Walking to my car. Shoveling my driveway. Carrying groceries. Every detail of my life recorded without my knowledge. I felt violated, betrayed. How could I have cared for a man who spied on me every day? And yet, even as anger boiled inside me, another thought crept in. Why leave this to me? Why not destroy it before he died? I searched through more folders, more tapes. And then I found something that changed everything. A letter, written in Edward's uneven handwriting. It was addressed to me. "Michael," it began. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone. I know you must feel anger. I don't blame you, but you deserve the truth. The surveillance was never about control. It was protection. There are men who would have killed me for what I knew. Watching the neighborhood was my way of staying alive, of keeping danger at bay. And when you showed up in my life, stubborn and unafraid, I realized something. I couldn't protect myself anymore. But maybe I could protect you. Tears blurred my vision as I read on. You think I chose you by chance. I didn't. I chose you because you reminded me of my brother. Because you didn't walk away. Because you cared when no one else did. The tapes, the files, they're my burden, not yours. Burn them if you must. But keep the key. Keep the house. And remember me not as a spy, but as a man who was scared to die alone. I set the letter down, my heart pounding. The rage I had felt moments earlier began to fade, replaced by something harder to name. Compassion, sorrow, gratitude. Edward Carter had lived in shadows his entire life, hiding behind anger and walls of secrets. And yet, in his final days, he had chosen me, the neighbor who once hated him, to carry his story. I spent the following weeks sorting through his belongings. Some things I destroyed, as he had suggested. Others I kept, unable to let go of the man I had come to know. The house, once a place of bitterness and suspicion, slowly became my home. But sometimes, late at night, I still feel his presence. I imagine him sitting in the study, scribbling notes, watching through the cameras hidden in the walls. And instead of anger, I feel something else. A strange kind of peace. Edward taught me something I'll never forget. That even the most guarded hearts can be broken open by kindness. That even a life lived in shadows can end in light if someone is willing to care. And as I sit here now, telling you this story, I realize the greatest secret Edward ever kept wasn't in the tapes or the folders. It was in the simple truth he left me with. We all need someone, even spies. If you've stayed with me until the end, remember this. Compassion has the power to break through walls stronger than steel. I thought Edward Carter was just a bitter old man, but he turned out to be the most extraordinary person I ever met. Too many of you watch these stories without subscribing. Don't let this channel fade into silence. Click subscribe, share this video, and tell me in the comments, would you have trusted Edward or walked away?